Alright, I'm going to do a little follow-up first before we get into the next part. But basically, we've got a couple of minor changes here to the API that I neglected to cover last time, or that I didn't realize until now. So there was the to clause, which only matters when you're doing a forgot key. So this forgot API part, it actually has two uses. The first use is if you send email and it's a valid email, then it's going to look up your user name and send you a code in email, generating a forgot key. But if you send the email along with a to clause and a key clause, and I'm calling them clauses, but they're really just properties of the JSON object. But if I have these values included with email, it means I'm not looking to reset my password. Instead, I'm looking to set my password based on a key. So the to key have to be present, one or the other, and then it checks to see if they are a part of it. So whenever you see if is set something in the JSON, it's checking to see that you included the parameters. So if you don't have email, you're not going to be doing anything with forgot because it requires an email. It doesn't require you to be logged in. If you look up here at API logout, it actually does check to see if there's a session and then logs out the session. Otherwise, it tells you that the session is expired. So with forgot, and I'm sending 102s here, but really they could just be ones or zeros or negative ones or the value false, but 102 just means error. So anyway, in forgot here, we're sending, you have to have email. If you have email, it's going to look up your username. If you don't have a user, it's going to tell you that you don't have a user and it's going to die. But it's going to tell you no such user. And then to key, if you have them both, then you're good. And it doesn't really tell you what's wrong. I'm writing the client. Anybody who has access to this is writing the client. So it's no big deal. You don't have to say, but you could say like, oh, you didn't include the to clause, or oh, you didn't include the key. Now, to is going to be the value of the new password. Key is going to be the forgot key, which has to be valid. It's going to check then if the key is the right key. Then it's going to check if the current time is less than. Wait. Yeah, there's another error. Let me just fix that real quick. If today is less than the expired time. No, that was right. If it's greater than the expired time, it's going to send you a new key. Otherwise, it's going to go in here. Now at this point, it actually doesn't need if is set, so I'll get rid of that line. So at this point, it knows that to has been set and the key has been set, and it attempts to set the password. And if that works out, it tells you success. Otherwise, it tells you that the password was not secure enough, because that's the only other reason it would fail, because we've already checked to see if you have a user here by using the email address to look it up. And then in the other case, if we do have a user and we have a valid email, it's going to try to do the original thing that we were talking about, where it's going to send a code to your email, and that's all it's going to do. So that little logic changed a bit. What I had done before is I didn't check to see if you had these two things, and I also was checking the key independently of checking the time, and that would have created an issue. So this way, it has to get through all of these if statements to do the thing. Okay, so the thing it's trying to do successfully is set the password. So that's all the branching and stuff that has to happen for the logic for API forgot. So that's changed. There was one other change, and I don't exactly remember what it was right now, but I did. Oh, in date time, I was sending some ISO and this is date. I don't really need to do any of that. I think one thing I could do here differently is actually send the timestamp like this, and then send the date, and we'll send that as date R, so it's in like a standard format. But you don't really need to do that, or we could do like month, day, year, and then current time, which would be like hour, minute, second, second dot milli. But we're not actually going to do that. Well, what is millisecond? So going to php.net, I'm looking up the date function. Now the date function is deprecated, but millis. V U. So V dot V. So that'll give you a date and time. We could do the AM PM thing. It really depends on what this is for. I think it's actually not for this, but we'll give it an AM PM. Yes, the letter P. That's the letter A. So, that's just for convenience right there. But that's a little bit better than what it was, which was not necessary. That format was esoteric, and it had something to do with an API I was writing for somebody before. So that's been cleared up, and that's been cleared up. And now we're done with this API so far. But of course, we need to create some new actions, which we talked about last time. So I'm going to go ahead and create, let's see, there's profile, forgot, log in, log out. There's no create, so there needs to be a create. All right. And that's going to be creating a user. And then, but it might mean creating a game. It might mean some other stuff. So it's just the create action. And we're going to do a friend action. And this is where we're done like restructuring. And now we're just going to get down to the nitty gritty. There's actually not going to be that much more of the backend, at least in the beginning, because, or as far as database tables and things like that, we don't need that many more unless we want to add some specific features, which I'm not going to get into. I don't think, because they're important, but they don't need to be done right away. So we've got create, we've got friend. That should, friend is where you're going to be creating, that. I'm actually going to change the size of this window so that it's a little more video friendly. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is create the create. And the second thing we're going to do is create the friend. So in the case of create, there's actually going to be sub-creates. So part of that is going to be type, and that's going to be in type. And then depending on the type, we'll call a different one. So the valid types are user, okay. And then game. Okay. And then there's the default, which is that there was an error, so we'll do auth and transmit bad create action had bad type for create action. A new type provided for create action. Okay. And that should cover us in case these two don't work out. Now we're going to create the create game. Or we're going to do the create user. So create user does not require you to be logged in. But we're going to need to kind of do a round robin on this. So here's the problem. It's a web API. So if you have a, well, where did it go? I just made space. So one of the problems that we're going to encounter here, did I not do that? Weird, that was weird. Control L and Nano will redraw the screen. Not sure what's up with that. It seems to want to be slightly larger, so we'll just make it slightly larger. All right. So the problem is that a bot could learn, and obviously since I'm telling people what the API is, the bot could learn what the create user is, and it could spam me. You know, like all of this is somewhat hackable. So there's got to be some sort of a confirm step. And even that could be hacked, you know. And then you're just creating users ad nauseum. So I'm going to have to think a little bit harder on the create user part. So we're going to pause on that one. Might not share that information, but ultimately there has to be like an email validation step, and there has to be some other protections in place there. For create game, however, you don't need to worry because you have a valid user account. So if is null this session, or is null this auth, and transmit not logged in. What else? Well, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is a little bit backward, but basically we're going to look up the user's games. So let's just go into the model and look at game, and game has nothing in it. Let's look at user real quick. And I believe there's a, find by email, find by ID. Okay, so game actually needs a bunch of functions in it. One thing you're going to want to do is list the games. So let's do by user ID, or by user. All right, so we passed user in. So if we recall the MySQL workbench, you know, we're going to have to look at the database from time to time. So if we recall the MySQL workbench application, okay, we can look in here and we can look at the structure of user and of game. And in game there's R users, but there's initiator. So initiator is it my game? And R users is it a game that is containing me? So by user. So let's see. So we're gonna do return this select array initiator arrow user ID. So we know that all of the games for this user can be gathered this way. Okay. Now this is if you created a model, but we're going to make this a static function. And we're going to call it global database. Right, and we're going to create the model. Okay. And then we're going to go in here and say gselect. So let me just make sure that's correct. The way I'll do that is I'll go into code PDO model and I'm going to look. Oops. Oh. Why is that? Because it's core PDO model. And we're going to look for select. Right. So select can be, well, what if my model? Okay, models. All right. So let's see. Get set by field value. Okay. So we can use by to do this. So by field value. All right. The way I did it, I think, is probably okay. But we're going to do by, and then that's initiator, comma user ID. So this will get us existing games. So now we're going to have a list of games that are being passed in from a by user, and we're going to go for each in the list as game. So now it comes down to the question of, are games active once? And I think for right now, it's going to be that games are active when they are active until later. So let me just double check here. We have the list of options here, and one of them is started. We know that 1 is started and 0 is not started. So this is one of those things where we're going to slowly build it out. But what happens when a game is shut down? Where is my editor? Well, if we're going to abort these games, we need to inform other users. So this actually does come back to needing a new table, right? So when you abort the game, if people are in the lobby, they need to be informed that the game was closed and give them a reason. So let's go over here to the tables in the DB, and we're going to add a new table. Okay, and this table is going to be called message. All right, maybe notification. Hey, I just got some of those. Notification. So this is going to be for messages that originate from the server. Okay, and okay, so we've got the ID. It's going to have an expiry or a sent. That's the time it was sent. It's going to have a expiry, and if expiry is 0, then it's never going to expire. All right, and then we're going to have the content, and the content is going to be in JSON. All right, that should cover all of that. Now there's the user it's going to. And that's just it. That's the end of it. So we're going to apply that to the database. Now we have notification. So we created that. Now we're going to go back to our editor. All right. We're going to pause our work on game, and now we're going to create notification. All right. So notification class. All right. Public function. Well, static by user. Now we're going to go and select all the notifications. We're going to have one that expires. Expire for user. We can just expire them all. Expire expired. And that doesn't even take anything. All right. All right, that should return a list of all of the notifications available for that user. Expire expired will get rid of anything where the expiry date, so we have to have a now. So you just say, we're going to have to write a custom one for that. So global database. What we're doing here is this allows us to call it at any point. It just creates a new model for that notification, attaches it to the database. Now we're going to say messages equals m select where, and then where, what's the value? Expiry does not equal 0, and I think you do this. And expiry is less than now. So now, right? All right, so that should return a list of messages that need to be expired. Now we're going to make another one. All right, and we're going to go for each messages as expired. Notification expire message, and then return count messages. All right, now down here, so what that does is it returns the number of expired messages, and it tells it to expire each one. In this one, we're expecting it to have a model equals new notification. We're expecting it to have a message. So all right, and then we're going to get that message. We're actually just going to delete it. So we do that with m delete, and then array, and I believe just ID, and then message ID should do it. Okay. So that should delete messages that are expired one at a time. Now, that's not efficient. It would be more efficient just to delete. So maybe we could just do this, but we wouldn't get a count that way. But I don't know that we need a count. But this will delete one, this will delete many. Let's just double check that our where clause is correct. So we can do that by using the MySQL Workbench, opening up a query, You can right click here and say copy to clipboard delete statement. You can paste that in here, and then your where expression would be something like expiry is not equal 0 and expiry is less than 100. And you can see that there's nothing in here that says that that's bad form. Okay. The only other thing we need to check on too is whether or not our delete needs a where. So you might have the right where there. So let me just double check that. Again, I'm going to go and I'm going to read the code for model. I'm going to search for the delete clause, and it looks like it's a where clause. It's referring to db delete, which is in a different location. So let's look at that. And in fact, model generally matches all this stuff. So now we've got delete. It does have a little thing here that stops you from deleting everything. So it actually wants an array, or it can be a string. And in our case, it is a string. If it's an array, it's looking for a specific thing. And we're looking for actually something even more specific than just a value being a certain value. So what we're doing instead is we're deleting in this special case. All right. And actually, I don't even need that space there. So that should be okay. Maybe I need a quote somewhere that I don't have them. We'll find out when we need this, when we run this. There will be a log if there's an issue. And we don't need messages. We can just return the value of mdelete. But that'll let us take care of that. Then that'll expire there. We can do a single message. Obviously, this is actually identical to just deleting a message. And while it's good to have backups of stuff, you don't really need to do all that. So there, that'll allow us. See, but the problem with doing that is that it, well, we don't need that. All right, so we're just trying to keep it simple. So by user, right? So we can get all of our notifications by user. Then we can delete them all. So we would probably want to run this first. So when we go to get the ones for the user, we can run this expired. Well, after we create the model, we can run m expire expired. Okay. All right. So and then we need to be able to write one. So let's write the write clause for the user ID, and then the message, right? Content is JSON. So we're going to do global database. We're going to get a notification model. We're going to insert array, and all we're going to do is content JSON encode content. I think there's, yeah. And then what else? What are the other things? Sent. So when we're writing it, we're writing that. So we're going to go sent. Well, let's just do sent was now. Normally, I would say an expirer would be now plus, and then it's like 1,000 times 5 seconds times 60, times 60 seconds times 5, which is 5 minutes. All right. And what else? Generally, that's what we want. And we'll just say here expiry is -1. Sorry, I moved this. Put that back. Expiry equals -1. Down here we'll say expiry is less than 0. Then do this, else 0. So it never expires. So by default it will expire 5 minutes from now. So that allows us to have a finite number of messages. And this is called every time we're looking up stuff, which allows the server to sort of be pushed along. But if you wanted to, you could have a cron job or a maintenance task, remove them as well. Sort of double check that. You can also do like a timed event. There's a lot of ways to do it. But anyway, we've got expiry, sent content. We need a user. Okay, so that looks good to me. That covers all of the bases there. I moved it again. That covers all the bases. So now we've got everything set properly in the right clause of the notification. So now, if we go back to game, okay. If we go back to game, we're going to want to send a notification when games are being closed. So there's a couple of things that are going to happen here. One is we need to get the games, so we have that ability already. And maybe here in the action we say, whoa, you got a game started already. You can't be starting another game. And then down here we got abort game. So we need to create another static function. Abort game. All right. And then aborter, right, which would be the user. All right, abort games user. Well, we already know who the user is, but we can just send it there explicitly. We'll call it the aborter. So for each game, if game, well, for one we have to find out, so users in game equals explode, and then a pipe sign, and then game are users. So what this means is that everything that's going to be stored in a list is going to have that pipe after it. So this gives us a list, and then we go through and we say for each users in game as participants, right? We do one of two things. We say if int val participant equals int val aborter ID, then we ignore it. Otherwise, we send a notification. Well, for one, we have to say if game started, if not game started. If game started, it's good to use int val, float val, bool val, string val, but anyway, equals 0. Then we can just abort the game. No big deal. So for if it equals 1, what do we do? Otherwise, we're going to go through each user in the game. See, I'm running a little proof here. Otherwise, we're going to go through each user in the game, and we're going to notify them that the game is over. So the game has not yet started. So in this case, we're going to put a to-do, ask user, So we're going to maybe have to create a way for users to ask questions of other users or vote. So maybe we give the game to a different user and we take this user out of the game. Some of this stuff isn't fully realized. What happens when that happens? Is the server takeover? Maybe. So we're just going to put a little to-do there. We'll get back to it. Now down here, if int_val, probably not today, if int_val participant is equal to the aborter, then we don't want to send them a message. Otherwise, we want to write the user. And this is a participant ID. This is not a full user thing. So that reminds me. So then we want to go back to notification and make sure that, yeah, it's a user ID for write. So we've got that user ID in there. Now we're going to send the message, which would be like, the initiator of this game has closed the game. Has what do you call it? Retreated from. The initiator of this game has rescinded the game. I don't know. It's probably a better way. And then that'll send it with an expiry. That's fine. So if you haven't heard that in 5 minutes, no big deal. But that's not going to be adequate enough because we need to send an array message, right? And then the next thing we need to send is type game, and then I don't know, code 0. All right, so that'll send a message. Let's see, originator, and then we'll do user. I like the idea of user, and then that's better. All right, so then aborter nickname or username or get name. We need to do a get name. So user get display name. Border. So yeah. So code 0 is going to mean for the type game that the game is no longer valid. That's going to trigger the client to go back to the create game menu. Right? So we have to write that in, but we're not going to be doing that quite yet. So that handles abort game, and then there's abort the actual game. Not sure about this. Well, so there's some other question marks here. Like, what if the game is stale? So if the game started, something has to check. So before we even do this, another thing we're going to have to check is the game stale? So what a stale game is a game that nobody's playing. It stopped, like the last turn happened more than 5 minutes ago. It's not active. Maybe even more than that. Maybe a half an hour ago, the last turn. I mean, it really depends on the game settings. But we're going to have here a clause that says, remember, we haven't even gotten to create game yet. So let's just get that in there. Right, so what this has to do is it has to be a proof that goes through all of the games, make sure that there's no stale games that aren't being played anymore, that the user doesn't have multiple games, and then it's going to have to delete those games that are stale or are no longer valid, and it's going to have to return an error code if the case is that the game can't be created. So we're going to assume, the most naive version of this is just simply make a game, which would look something like this. And then there's like G equals new game database, right? And then G create or insert. And then it's like array, initiator, user ID. I think game has, let's look here. Game has a name which has to be generated, so we'll have to do that. So we've got like name, and that'll be like user, game get name user, get or create name, right? Create game name, right? We have to be kind of specific with the names of these things. All right, and then there are some other settings here that we have to create. So let's see what they are. Created, all right? We have to set all these values to like initial values, right? Because if you remember when we created the database, it was like, I guess they're down here actually. So I can leave this section. All right, so there's last state. So last state is going to be an empty JSON. Then there's turn count, and that's going to start at 0. All right, and then there's started, no, right? And then there's what else in the order? Well, our users is going to be set equal to user ID and then a pound sign, or I'm sorry, a pipe symbol. So that means that there's a list of 1. The name of the game is not for a little bit. We have created, so we want created equal to string to time now. So let's create it right now. Last played. And we're going to give that the same value because it might be slightly later. So why don't we just go now equals string to time now. And then we'll just pass now twice. All right. Name. Name is going to be something we generated. But before that is turn count. And there's last state, which is nothing. That actually happened way up here, like the first thing. Last state are users. I'm doing it in the same order it appears in the database. Initiator is this user. Created, nobody. Or created now. Last played now. Turn count 0. Name some random thing we have to create. Started is 0 because it's not player limit. We'll always start them with a limit of 2, so it's like a 2-player game. Started, and that's it. That's settings. So settings, we don't even have any settings yet. So eventually this might get replaced with some sort of, game : basic settings, or something like that. It returns an array of stuff that's then encoded in the JSON, but for now it's just an empty JSON thing. And it sort of is like that. It's a little organic in the beginning. So we've got all of that, and so that's going to insert the new game. and then we're actually going to return that. So that would be the ultimately naive way to create a game. Let's create that static function, create game name, user, and we'll just really simply do user get display name, and then, you know, so it's just going to be like Jim's game. All right. Get display name is something we haven't written yet that's going to give us either the user's name or their nickname. So let's just do that right now. If not, empty user nickname, return user nickname. Otherwise, return user username. It's that simple. So these are the simplest versions. You can make these more complicated, but how important are they? Because it's really about the game. So I'm going to stop it right there. There's a little bit more we have to do in here, specifically around the create game. It needs to call these functions and do things with these abortions of games and figuring out whether or not they can create a game. But this is the most naive one for testing. We can do this in the beginning and then slowly peter out from there. I'm not even going to test this yet, but let me just quickly go back to index here, and in the model section, Shreds API, we're just going to look for create game. All right, and you know, it's sort of half done. So let me just comment that out, and I'm not going to write a bunch of code that doesn't matter. So I will be adding this, but that's where that would be called from. And I'll leave it at that. So thanks again for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please come back next time. I will be working on more game-related backend stuff for you to take a look at. This has been RetroLab Code, Episode 6, Pixitron Game Engine and the Poppy Backend, creating a turn-based strategy game using a web server and a local client, created using Electron.js and the Pixi.js game engine. My name is Herb, and this has been Retrofriends.